All right, new episode of Jung Naiv. Never happened.
All right, yeah, you're on.
All right, new episode of Jung Naiv. I have a not so new guest. Who are you?
My name is Yehuda Shaul.
Yehuda, what do you do?
I'm an Israeli activist for peace and against the occupation.
Why is that?
Because I served in the second Intifada in the Westbank for about 2 years. And despite the fact that I come from a right-wing background in Israel, meaning I come from a family that would vote politically right, I did my high school in a settlement in the West Bank, I have brothers and sisters today, settlers in the West Bank. My uncle was a settler in Gaza up to 2005. When I did my military service from 2001 to 2004, and I served for about 2 years as an infantry combat soldier and a commander during the peak of the second Intifada in the West Bank, the kind of stuff that I've done and seen brought me to where I am today, to understand that the occupation is morally wrong, morally indefensible. There is nothing on earth that I believe can justify a permanent occupation that strips millions of Palestinians from rights and dignity the way we do it, especially not if you had a civilian settlement element into this. And I believe it's destroying the morality of the IDF. I think it's destroying Israeli society. And that's why we try to end it.
Well, is that you're not so new to Jung Naiv because we did an episode in Hebron in 2018. It was number 389. For people who haven't seen it yet, make sure to see it. How's the situation in West Bank these days?
Rightly so, everybody is concerned with Gaza. Even more with, the possible further escalation in the north in Lebanon. But there is also the West Bank, yeah? And things today in the West Bank are pretty bad. The first few months after October 7, when I was going around the West Bank, especially in a place like Hebron where I served for about a year, I think it was the most tense and difficult I've seen the West Bank since my service in the second Intifada.
Why was it tense?
In Hebron specifically, Palestinians were put under curfew, partial curfew. Curfew means you can't leave the house day and night. So in downtown Hebron, which is in the area where we visited, and around the settlements, Palestinians were again put under curfew where they couldn't leave the house apart from like specific designated hours in the morning and in the evening, coming back to the area where they live. There was obviously the military was very aggressive in different behavior. There was restrictions of movement throughout the West Bank post-October 7. Work permits for Palestinians in Israel were canceled. Now, at the beginning, it makes sense, right? You had this horrible massacre in the south of Hamas coming out of Gaza into Israel and basically massacring Israeli civilians in the kibbutzim and the communities around. So you're shocked a bit and you cancel all the work permits. But then when the Israeli security establishment started recommending that Israel should renew the permits in order to make sure that the Palestinian economy doesn't collapse, in order to basically preserve and improve stability in the West Bank, ministers like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, which for them, this is an opportunity to kind of like lead us to almost Armageddon type of politics, yeah, in reality, refused. Yeah. So you have also economic hardship, part of the fact that Palestinians don't have permits to go into Israel. That also means that Palestinian farmers who have land in what is called the seam zone, which is basically the land between the Green Line, the international recognized borders, and the separation barrier, which is regulated, the wall, which is regulated with permits. So these permits were also canceled. So all these farmers have lost basically by now 2 seasons, like of plowing, harvesting, and working the land. Part of the restrictions of movement within the West Bank, Palestinians, especially hurting communities, were not even allowed, in some cases, to go even out of their own village. Yeah, there was almost closures on local areas throughout the West Bank. Things were very aggressive.
And who decides that there's a curfew, that they don't have freedom of movement? Is that the IDF or the settlers?
So generally it's the IDF deciding these things, but obviously some of these decisions are also taken out of pressure from the settlers. So settler politicians, settler municipalities, local settlers from an area, kind of like start to protest or put pressure, it's dangerous for us that Palestinians can use this road together with us, or these kind of stuff. And after a while, you would see the military sometimes putting restrictions. Mm. But there was something very interesting post-October 7, which is something that, my background was my adult life, basically. After my military service, I was involved with Breaking the Science for many years, up to 2020. So it's important for me to say that I'm not speaking here on behalf of Breaking the Science. I'm not formally, still part of the organization.
I mean, you're the co-founder, but you're not part of Breaking the Science anymore.
Yeah. Today, from time to time, I do my reserve duty there, so to speak. Yeah, I come to help in some issues, but I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm part of a different association these days. It's called OFEK, the Israeli Center for Public Affairs, which is like a think tank and an advocacy organization working on...
So it's like an Israeli government PR thing. Israeli Center for Public Affairs.
Definitely not this Israeli government.
Yes.
We try to work on policies that can lead us towards a resolution of the conflict, of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based in a 2-state paradigm. So that's definitely not this current Israeli government. But going back to your question, post-October 7 in the West Bank, one of the things we used to say in the past and breaking the silence is to try to explain to people why settlers in the West Bank enjoy impunity. Yeah? Why there is no accountability on settler violence against Palestinians. And obviously there's a lot of reasons when you try to understand that. And first and foremost is because as soldiers serving in the West Bank, our orders are that we are there to protect the settlers, not to protect Palestinians. So I remember it as a soldier. Yeah, my orders were, or as a commander, the orders that my soldiers were given and I gave them is our job is to protect the settlers. If we see settlers attacking Palestinians, not our job. You basically call the Israeli civilian police. So you have this division of labor in the West Bank. Yeah, you have 2 communities in the West Bank living under 2 different legal systems, enforced by 2 different executive branches. Right. So you have Israeli settlers living under Israeli civilian law, enforced by the Israeli civilian police, and you have Palestinians living under martial law, enforced by the military. And obviously the amount of rights Palestinians have under military law is a bit less, than civilian law. But also the fact that our orders as soldiers are not to intervene and not to protect Palestinians, and it's the job of the police, doesn't mean that the police does their job. They actually don't, and it's also because of the political power of the settlers, and it's also because as soldiers in the West Bank, it's kind of like us against them, and the settlers are part of us. They speak our language, right? Versus the enemy, the Palestinians. And it's obviously also because on a Friday night, the dinner, you're invited into settler homes, and you eat a nice schnitzel and a bit of food than what you are served in the barracks, right? And it's also that if you're now serving in Hebron, and so on a Sunday, you might be taken on a tour with the settlers to see the Tomb of the Patriarchs, to see the city, to understand why we are serving here and why it's so important to be here. Yeah. So there are many reasons, right, to why we are on the side of the settlers. But there is a fundamental reason that is not discussed enough, and that is that the relationship between the settlers and the military today is so symbiotic that in many times it's hard to mark where starts the civilian, ends the civilian, starts the military, ends the military. And I'll give you an example, and then I'll get to why October 7 is so important on this topic. For example, during my basic training or my advanced training, I was sent for like a week or two to guard a settlement. Happens to almost every combat soldier in the IDF. During your training, you're sent here and there for a week or two. I was assigned, by the way, to the Kiryat Arba settlement. Somehow Hebron is kind of like at the center of my service all over, yeah? So when I was... Now, who do you think gave me my orders when I was there? Was it my direct officer?
Yes.
No. It was the settler security coordinator of Kiryat Arba who gave me my mission statement, who gave me my rules of engagement. So every settlement and many of the outposts, i.e. settlements that are not even authorized under Israeli planning and construction laws, yeah? So these are outposts, are settlements that officially don't exist, but practically some of them, many of them have a settler security coordinator. It's basically a local settler who is hired by the regional or local council of the settlers, paid, financed by the Ministry of Defense, and he's kind of like a local sheriff. He's a civilian, I'm a soldier, and I'm under him.
Weird.
And I can go on for, take another example, okay? Settlements in the area of Ktumim, yeah, near Nablus, where Bezalel Smotrich, our Minister of Finance, lives. Several years ago, yeah, this is a testimony of one of the members of Breaking the Science who served there. The IDF has video cameras. Yeah, we had in Gaza, right? There were female soldiers who were monitoring video cameras along the border. Many of them were murdered. Some of them kidnapped to Gaza until now. Hostages being held weren't free yet. But in the West Bank, we have these cameras also. But in that area, there is a set of cameras there, monitored, not by female soldiers, but by young women who do their national service. It will be mainly national religious women, girls, so it's an alternative to the military service.
They don't have to go.
Instead of doing the army, they do national service, yeah? They monitor cameras under the settler security of the local council there. I'm a platoon officer who leads a jeep patrol in the area. They monitor the cameras. They have a military radio, and they can go and give me assignments. We see in that valley, a Palestinian crossed that line. Can you go and kick him out? They're civilians. They work for a civilian security system of the settlement, but they have a military radio and they can assign me missions. Yeah, to that level things are.
A non-government organization can give orders to a government body.
It's not a typical NGO, but it's kind of like it's under the local council. So it's like a municipal body. Their security division or department.
But it's not part of the government.
It's part of the municipal government. It's not part of the IDF. It's not part of the security forces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the IDF has to listen to, I don't know, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense, right?
But here, the soldier on the ground listens to the security of the settlers.
Does he have to, or does he choose to?
No, that's how it's integrated. Soldiers who serve, Now, this is how the system works, okay, to make it easier. But post-October 7, we've seen in front of our eyes another systematic issue in this, like something that is structural in this, which is what is called the regional defense units. So most of the West Bank is controlled by the IDF. There's the section around Jerusalem that there's parts run by the Border Patrol. But basically we have 6 regional brigades. Yeah, so each district of the West Bank has a regional brigade that is responsible for it. And each of these regional brigades has what is called regional defense units, which is reserve units mainly made by local settlers. And why is that?
Because they live there?
They live there. But the structure is that in a full-scale war, the better equipped, better trained combat soldiers go to the front lines. And in our case, post-October 7, obviously the front line is Gaza and Lebanon. So who remains in the West Bank to hold the line there?
The settlers.
Reservists. Some of them are regular reservists,
Right.
but some of them are the local settlers who are mobilized to basically protect their own homes, yeah, their own settlements. So now let me ask you a question. If on Saturday I eat with them schnitzel, and if on Sunday I go with a tour to them, and on Monday they come to train in my shooting range, on Wednesday when they attack a Palestinian, I will arrest them?
Yes.
No. Yeah, the system cannot go against itself. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. This is fully integrated. So what you had, so if I go back to your question, is it the military or the settlers? In many cases, post-October 7 on the ground, the West Bank, as I will tell you, I don't know. Because it's the local settlers, but they're in uniform. Because they are now part of the regional defense unit. So is it the settlers decided that this community, this Palestinian community cannot go out grazing? Or is it the military? You know, I'm taking it now to a different angle and to bring it back here. Mm-hmm. If we look at the history of footage we see of settler violence coming out in the West Bank, so 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years ago even, we would have seen every once in a while images of Palestinians being attacked by settlers and IDF soldiers standing idly by. That is a very, very common scene from the West Bank, anyone who follows closely.
I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah. And that is okay, meaning that's according to the orders, as we said.
Right.
The orders of the soldiers are, we are not there, we are not here in the West Bank to protect the Palestinians, right? So standing idly by is what we are told in our briefings. In the past few years, you saw more and more images of soldiers not only standing idly by, but of joining the attacks. Yeah? Now, that happens for different reasons. In some cases, yeah, there was actually post-October 7th, there was one case where settlers on a Saturday came out of the settlement of Rechelim near the Palestinian community of Asawia, and a Palestinian was basically shot dead while olive harvest. Mm-hmm. And it was a settler who was also a soldier, and he was on his weekend leave. Yeah? Okay. Came back home to the settlement or family or whatever. They went out and he was there with his military, issued gun, and he basically killed that guy. Another example of how these things happened is that there are basically specific units in the IDF that are made of more of extremists. So there is, for example, a unit called the Desert Frontier, which is a unit made of kind of hilltop youth. That these are kind of like the more violent settlers in the outposts or in the herding farms throughout the West Bank. Many of them would have maybe criminal background or whatever. So you had this unit kind of like to rehabilitate them through military service, and they were located in the West Bank. So a unit like this that is made of these kind of extremists obviously will be very, very aggressive.
Why do they put them into one unit if they are all extremists?
So they put them in one unit for kind of like, the idea was, the official idea that you could read in the media is that they know the area. These guys were out there with sheep, whatever. They can be in the mountains. They could be in the hills. They know kind of like the open areas in the West Bank. So we use this advantage and actually place them in the area where they used to live. So, but, horrible stories came out of that. And it's actually, according to media reports, it's one of the units that the U.S. State Department was investigating for serious human rights violation under what is called the Lehi law. Mm-hmm. That under that law, it's an American law, you can designate units and basically make it illegal for them to accept U.S. military aid. Mm-hmm. Another unit is the ultra-Orthodox battalion in the IDF. it started over 20 years ago with a good intention of having a unit that will be more strict religiously so ultra-Orthodox can join. So that means the food will be even more kosher than the regular food. It means there's no women in the unit. It means, yeah. So kind of like a more friendly environment culturally, religiously for ultra-Orthodox. But with the years, Orthodox nationalists, extremists kind of like Smotrich and even more, started coming to that unit. Because from a religious perspective, it was better for them. It was kind of like also like half an autonomy within the army, yeah? So that unit is also filled with very extremists. And by the way, there were also a unit that was examined by the U.S. State Department because they were involved in the killing of Omar Assad, the Palestinian-American. I think it was around 70-something, almost 80 years old. So that's another, okay? So this is another reason why you would see more soldiers joining. The last reason to say about this, why we see more and more soldiers joining settler attacks, is the sociological change within the IDF. The IDF of today is not the IDF I served in 20 plus years ago.
Why?
The kind of like old elites of Israel, middle, high class, secular, yeah, big urban centers, better education background, yeah, kibbutz, etc. So many of them, mainly from the urban centers, more liberal, more individualistic, started seeing on the military has kind of like a path, looking for a military service that can advance them in the Israeli economy. And they're also better educated in science, math, etc. So they would find, you know, their way into cybersecurity, signal intelligence, right? These places are very important strategically, but also are the path for the IT market, yeah, in Israel. While the rank and file has been transformed, sociologically speaking.
The boots on the ground.
Exactly. And what you had is more and more representation for national religious, which is the group that the ideological hardcore settlers come out of, and for what Professor Yagi Levy, very important sociologist of the IDF, calls blue-collar combatants, basically working class periphery Mizrahi Jews from the periphery who join the, you know, kind of like combat units. Just to give you a statistic to hold on to this, the percentage of national religious among graduates of officer cadets and infantry, right? So infantry is the front line kind of, right? That's what, in 1990, we're talking about 2.5% of graduates of officer cadets and infantry being national religious.
2.5%.
2017, 2018, we're talking about close to 40%, around 37, 38%. That's about 3 times their size in society.
Right.
And I think that just these statistics shows you what I'm talking about. It's a different army.
And it was like an effort by the religious groups to do that, to accomplish that, to take over the boots on the ground.
Take over the army.
Right.
Not only the army, also state institutions, etc. Yeah, and you can see the Supreme Court of today is not the Supreme Court of 30 years ago, and you know many things. Yeah, but yeah, and the army, yes, yeah, there was a whole effort of the it was called the pre-military academies. Yeah, it's a whole effort. Yeah, definitely yes. So this is how, yeah. So it was the fact that you have the sociological change of the army, the fact that you have just to sum it up, the fact that you have some units that are made more of extremists, and the fact that you have that it's sometimes settlers who are also serving on a weekend leave, and basically the guys go out to attack the nearby village, so they join them. This is why we saw more and more videos or cases in the past few years where soldiers were not only standing idly by, but also joining the attacks by settlers. Post-October 7, with the regional defense units, yeah, it's not that the soldiers are standing idly by. It's not that the soldiers sometimes. Now the soldiers are the soldiers, and the soldiers are the settlers. Yeah, there's no distinction between them. That's actually also why you have so extreme levels of displacement of Palestinians. Yeah, we have about 19 entire communities, Palestinian herding communities, farming communities in Area C that were forcibly transferred post-October 7. Because there is no even pretext anymore of a buffer between the violent settlers and the Palestinians. You had the same settler that 2, 3, 4 years ago was on the hilltop beating up the nearby Palestinian communities and trying to chase them off their land. Now he is in uniform with a gun. And when he comes to you, if you're a Palestinian, he comes to you at night, breaks into your house, slaps you, beats you up, sometimes even put you on the floor, put the gun on your head and tells you you have 48 hours to leave, or otherwise we come and kill you, or we come and burn your house, you leave. So we have post-October 7. What is it about? I think the UN numbers are around more or less, I think, 1,600 Palestinians being forcibly transferred. We're talking about 19 entire communities and a little bit more over a dozen partially expelled. So this was a major issue, settler violence and the military post-October 7.
So are you telling us that the settlers in the West Bank are running the occupying army?
So look, Haaretz actually published the numbers. Yeah, a gal she's from Haaretz. She got the numbers, the formal numbers, if I remember right, were about 5,500 settlers were mobilized in these units. So it's not all the soldiers that were in the West Bank, but it's a big chunk.
I saw Ben Gvir giving out weapons and guns to settlers a few weeks after October 7th.
That's a bit of a different story that you need to add to what we spoke about. That is what is called rapid response teams.
Okay.
So there are, again, until today, it's not clear to me how these guys were mobilized, but just because there are different tracks where they can be mobilized to reserve duty. But basically, the idea is that, every settlement will have a group of 10, 15 local settlers who are fully equipped and are training to some degree. So if something happens in a settlement, they, as their name, rapid response team, they can respond immediately until the more equipped and better trained and organized forces arrive. So that was the kind of reinforcing that kind of groups throughout the West Bank with these weapons. And there were also inside Israel, so in the north and the south, etc.
So what do Palestinian civilians do in the West Bank when settlers or settler soldiers or soldiers who are also settlers come in and attack them or threaten them? What do they do? Who can they call? Where can they get help?
To be honest,
almost
no one.
I'm asking because you said there's impunity for the settlers. I mean, when you ask the German government, they tell you as the occupying power, not only of Gaza and the East Jerusalem, but also of the West Bank, Israel has to protect the civilian population in the West Bank, which means the Palestinian civilians. Yeah. So I would think since the IDF is the occupying power, the military, they have to, first and foremost, from a legal standpoint and political standpoint, protect the Palestinians and have to prevent settlements and prevent settlers from going crazy or from being there at all. But from what you described, it's the complete opposite.
You're completely right. Look, not only under international law, the IDF must protect Palestinians. Even according to the letter of the law and regulations of Israel.
Okay.
Yeah, the soldiers should protect Palestinians. But the orders you get on the ground are, this is not your job. And yeah, again, in principle, you're right. But that's the reality in the West Bank. Before October 7, before the settlers became the military and the military is the settlers, yeah, before these, you already have basically almost complete blanket impunity to settlers. I highly recommend to our listeners to go on the website of an Israeli rights organization called Yesh Din. Yeah, there is a law. that tracks rule of law in the West Bank. And their numbers, again, I'm speaking from memory here, their numbers are, we're talking about around, if I'm not mistaken, 94% of Palestinian complaints don't lead to anything or closed. And it's not that the remaining 6% actually lead to conviction, imprisonment, etc. Yeah? But 94% don't lead to nothing, basically, just get closed. So Palestinians obviously lost complete trust in the Israeli authorities, and for good reasons. And Palestinians are left alone in a way, in that sense. What used to happen is that you would have, throughout the West Bank, what is called protective presence activists. So you would have Israeli activists who would come to protect Palestinian farmers and shepherds on their land. And, years ago, that would have been enough. The presence of Israelis would probably protect the Palestinian community. Post-October 7, we went so mad and so bad that even that was not enough. There was actually a very, very horrible case in a community, Palestinian community called Wadi Sik, that ultimately was forcibly transferred because of settler violence, where settler soldiers, again, all this, it's very fluid because, it's settlers who sometimes come in uniform and you're not sure, are they part of the rapid response teams? Are they part of the regional defense? Are they just doing reserve duty in Gaza and they're now on a weekend leave? Or are they, just they have uniform at home so they put it on? Or, right? Like, on the ground things were never that clear to us. But they basically, settlers came into the village, attacked Palestinians very seriously, plus basically kidnapped the Israeli activists, broke their cameras, stole their phones, broke their phones, beated them up. For a few hours, there was no contact with them. People were really, really scared. So what I'm trying to say is post-October 7 with these settler soldiers, even the presence of Israelis in many cases was not enough to protect the Palestinians.
Could you for our naive audience, could you explain why the settlers who don't live in Israel, they live in the Palestinian West Bank, in the occupied West Bank. So they don't live in Israel. Right.
Even according to Israel, formally. Why? So meaning put aside East Jerusalem.
Right.
Formally, Israeli law doesn't apply on the land in the West Bank.
But the people who illegally live there,
illegally under international law,
right? But the law of Israel still applies to these settlers who don't live in Israel.
Yeah, it's not only on settlers, by the way, also on me. Oh. So as an Israeli civilian citizen, I walk into the West Bank. There is a bubble of Israeli civilian law around me that gives me rights that Palestinians who live there don't have. Yeah? That's the setting. As I said earlier, it's one area, where you have two communities. And in some cases, in a place like Hebron, it can be like, a Palestinian shop on the bottom floor and a settler in the second floor, It can be even the same building, the same structure, so to speak, Palestinian doesn't have rights, civil rights. The Israeli civilian, being a settler or any visitor, has rights.
But it's not apartheid. That's what I learned.
Look, the issue of apartheid, you can approach it, and I would say in three different ways. You can approach it as a comparison to South Africa. You can approach it in the kind of like, I would say, social political science or so approach. And you can approach it from a legal approach, which is the crime against humanity of apartheid.
Yes.
So if we talk about the legal approach, I think it's important to understand that when it comes to the human rights community in Israel, I'm putting aside Palestinian rights community, I'm putting out the international human rights community, which they're, obvious, some of the issues that we're talking about. But when it comes to the human rights community in Israel, there is a wall-to-wall consensus that the crime of apartheid is being committed by Israelis within the West Bank. The debate and the discussion among the Israeli human rights community is the territorial application of the crime, meaning, is it also being committed in Gaza? Is it also being committed in proper Israel within the Green Line? But when it comes to the West Bank, there is basically, as far as I know, unanimity among the Israeli human rights community.
So you agree?
And again, the crime of apartheid, it's not about having two communities with different, The crime of apartheid, and again, I'm not in front of the exact definition, but it's systematic and inhumane crimes that are being committed with the intention to perpetuate, that are being committed as part of a system of domination by one group over the other with the intention to perpetuate it. Okay, so it's not necessarily what we think of it as a social science thing or as a political reality where there's two groups, they have rights, they don't have rights. It's inhumane crimes that are being carried out as part of a system of domination of one group over the other with the intention to perpetuate. And I think the fact that Israel has an intention to perpetuate the domination of Israelis over Palestinians in the West Bank, I think that is not under dispute. Not only, and it's not only in the level that you actually collect the actions of Israel, of expanding more and more settlements, of entrenching more and more the occupation. Also, if you look, by the way, at the guideline principles of the Israeli government, of this coalition. If I look at on this coalition guidelines, I have it with me here, and quote, the Jewish people have an exclusive and indisputable right to all parts of the land of Israel. Exclusive, all parts. The government will promote and develop settlements in all parts of the land of Israel, the Galilee, the Negev, the Golan, and Judea and Samaria. Okay? Jewish people have exclusive on all the land.
Golan belongs to Syria. Judea and Samaria, that's
West Bank.
That's the West Bank.
Yeah.
But for the Israeli government,
this is from the Israeli government guideline principles, So I'm saying it's not anymore something that you just have to de facto collect from the actions of Israel and the West Bank. You just have to open the government guideline principles and you basically see it, that the intention is very clear.
What happens, you travel around the West in Europe and in the US, you're here in Germany right now. When you explain to German politicians that that's what's happening in the West Bank is apartheid, how do they react?
No, that is not what I'm doing here now. And
but I mean, I can see them questioning you, and if you explain what you just explained to us, I can see the topic coming up. And how do they react? Like, do they want to hear it? Do they not want to discuss it? Because it's a serious issue.
It is definitely a serious issue, and as an Israeli, it is also very painful to be in a place where this is what what some of us are engaging in, and I think definitely if and when this issue comes up, one needs to be honest about the facts.
And how do
they're very painful?
How do they react to these painful and honest facts?
I think different people react differently. And so for me, this is just part of the story,
right,
of what people need to understand about what's going on in the West Bank or in Gaza or in Israel. Yeah, but this is an important part of recognizing that we have come to a place where the entire Israeli human rights community has arrived to the conclusion, to a very painful conclusion, that this is the reality.
So you said from a legal perspective, that's apartheid. You also said from a historic perspective, the South African apartheid, that's a different level, or the socio-political.
I think this is where one can argue, the comparison to apartheid South Africa. There are many, many things that are fundamentally different between Israel and South Africa.
Right.
So I think there is a reason why we were discussing the legal part of it, because I think this is where you do have unanimity among the Israeli human rights community.
Right. Now, just like when you discuss it here, like there are people who deny the issue or apartheid in the West Bank because that's totally different than South Africa.
But again, this is what you're now just pointing out is one of the issues around apartheid in general, which is it's a word that carries big weight for all of us, and I think, and this is one of the reasons why for many years I've refrained from going there, because for most people, apartheid is South Africa.
Right.
Yeah. And when it comes to Israel-South Africa comparisons, I think there are some issues that are pretty weak there. But most people are not aware that apartheid was seen as something so bad by the international community that a crime against humanity that is also called a crime of apartheid was created, yeah, and a convention, an international convention against apartheid, and the statute of the International Criminal Court, and that has its own definition. That we use the same word, but it's not about comparison to South Africa.
Right.
It's about a crime that has its own legal definition, and I think that is something that less people are aware of. And that's probably why the different reactions are on this.
I mean, same with the word. I mean, we don't have to get into it if you don't want to. Like genocide. I mean, what happens in Gaza? People are talking about genocide. The International Court, like The Hague is listening to a case from South Africa concerning genocide, and people here in the West, like, they're freaking out because this can't be genocide. They have like an historical perspective on it, and then there's, like, as you said with apartheid, the legal, the legal definition.
Look, I never thought that my country, will be on trial for the crime of genocide. That is something in my worst nightmares I never thought we're going to get to. And I'm not a lawyer, but to be honest, if you brought it up, I must say that from my perspective, I don't see the intent to destroy, when it comes to Israel's behavior in Gaza. I think there are a lot of illegal and immoral actions we're doing in Gaza. When it comes to specifically to the crime of genocide, I think it will be very, very difficult to prove, and I don't see it, where you would have the intent to destroy. But again, this is something that, one can have a conversation about. As far as I look at things, I find it very, very difficult to see how one can show that.
But I mean, even the fact that we're talking about it is, like, amazingly horrific. That there's this chance that the international community in the future could decide that there's a genocide being committed. Or not.
As I said, I think just the fact that this is on the table is extremely worrying, problematic and for me, shameful.
Do people in Israel, the civilian population, the millions of Israelis, do they take this issue seriously? Or do they just be like, oh, this is United Nations and international law, they're anti-Semitic, they hate Israel, we don't have to...
So I think the general population in Israel are more leaning to number two, to the second option that you were talking about. Yeah. Sadly enough, the gravity of what it means and hasn't really sunk yet to the majority of Israelis.
Do you think that could happen someday? Or do they want to remain in a bubble?
I think one of the things is that, there are many things to say about this, but our society, post the trauma of the massacres of October 7, as a society, I don't think we are, in Israel, we are still on October 9th in terms of our mindset. Yeah. We are still in the heart of the trauma. We haven't even arrived to the post-trauma, definitely not arrived to a place where one can reflect this as a society. It is that, and it's the dehumanization of decades of occupation that, sadly enough, hardens our hearts and shuts our ears and closes our eyes from seeing the immense suffering that we are creating, that we are inflicting on people in Gaza. This is, when you go through a trauma like this, you can fill yourself with rage, anger, and desire for revenge. And you can fill yourself with compassion, humanity, and you had, especially some members from the families who suffered the worst, families of hostages, of victims, of people who were murdered in October 7, that in the face of incredible tragedy, stood up and, didn't lose humanity and were courageous enough from day one to say, bombing Gaza to the Stone Age is not going to bring back our loved ones. We ultimately will have to live with the Palestinians. But sadly enough, the majority of society was full of rage, anger, and desire for revenge. And the blood was boiling, and there was no room for reason. And we reacted the way we reacted. And I think one of the things that really, that I feel is important to bring up here is that it is the friends of Israel, that it is our friends that we needed on those days to be our real friends and be the voice of reason and make sure we don't go down the drain with our desire for revenge and rage.
I mean, you're talking about the German government, and they would say, Yehuda, that's exactly what we've been doing.
But our friends did not deliver. Our friends allowed us to drive drunk. And some of our friends not only allowed us to drive drunk, made sure we take another shot before we go into the car, meaning, it was, we sadly enough, did not face friends who were trying to inject the reason into our calculations. And we arrived where we arrived.
I mean, if I let my friends drive drunk, I'm a bad friend. I'm not a good friend.
I agree. That's why I brought this analogy. Because many people think that by giving the Netanyahu government a carte blanche to do whatever they want, they're actually being friends of Israel, but no.
But the German government would deny that they give carte blanche.
Look, obviously no country can allow what happened in October 7 to its own citizens on its own territory.
Yes.
Yeah. The systematic, brutal slaughter and massacre of entire families, of women, children. And obviously in that sense, it's not that Israel had a right to defend its citizens. Israel had an obligation to defend citizens. And it failed to defend our friends who lived in the kibbutzim around Gaza. And by the way, it's failing them today with not making a deal and bringing back the hostages. Yeah, because for this government, this extremist government we have in Israel, the Israeli hostages are people that they're willing to sacrifice on the way for a greater good, which is if it's Smotrich and Ben Gvir, it's rebuilding settlements in Gaza, and if it's Netanyahu remaining in power and other things. But going back to, obviously Israel has an obligation to defend its citizens, but it must be within moral and legal boundaries. And for anyone who knows about how the IDF fights in Gaza, we know, and by now it's also clear from this war, that we are front and center violating international humanitarian law. And that is not only immoral, illegal, the disproportionate use of force that Israel is using in Gaza, the massive damage and the high numbers of civilian casualties, of what is called a very clean language collateral damage, the enormous destruction of property, of civilian infrastructure, etc. We are sowing the seeds of hatred for generations to come.
Don't you guys know that?
The U.S. Secretary of Defense said it months ago. Yeah, I think his formulation was what Israel is in a threat of turning a tactical victory into a strategic defeat. I think that was his words. And hoo-ha, we have suffered and are suffering and are inflicting on ourselves a strategic defeat because the thousands of Palestinian children who have lost their parents, they are not going to grow to become great lovers of Zion. And sadly enough, we don't see it on a day-to-day basis in Israel. We don't understand it yet. This is not something that we are talking about, enough in Israel. But this is where we are. We dug ourselves in a place that, generations to come will pay the price on this.
There's a saying I heard, I've been hearing for a few months now, concerning the war in Gaza, nothing justifies what happens on October 7th, but everything is justified what's happening because of October 7th.
I haven't heard this phrase, but I do not believe that neither are justified.
Right.
Yeah. And I also think there's another important part here to talk about, which is the context. And I talk about context not to justify October 7, because no context can justify the mass murder of civilians. Mm-hmm. But pretending that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict started on October 7 is not serious. It didn't happen in a vacuum. You need to recognize that there is a context, because if you want to think of any way moving forward, you must understand the context. Mm-hmm. And I think I would say it this way, that end of the day, yeah, there are many things we've learned from October 7. Or I believe we should learn from October 7. One is that, you can't manage the conflict. This idea that, you're going to get peace and stability by stepping over the throats of millions of Palestinians forever now. This idea, let's go regional, right? We were told in the past few years, Israel-Palestine doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. The Abraham Accords, we're going to the UAE, we're going to the Bahrain, we're going to Morocco, yeah? Mm-hmm. Apparently, no. I would actually argue that the Abraham Accords played a role in bringing us to October 7. Yeah?
The deal Trump helped make with Netanyahu and the Arab regimes.
And some of the Arab regimes.
Yeah, not all.
In the region, yeah. Because that was intentionally done to further isolate the Palestinians in the region, take the Palestinian issue off the table, right? What Netanyahu used to say, transcending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're putting that issue aside, and we're doing peace with the region, you see? And, we were taking Palestinian issue off the table. Hamas put it on the table. And what a horrible, expensive price to pay. Yeah? The massacres of October 7. There is also an issue of where we deploy our troops. Yeah, October 7, 6 o'clock in the morning. Again, speaking from memory here, but there was a talk about, I think it was around 23 battalions of the IDF were deployed within and around the West Bank, 4 battalions around Gaza. So when we talk about we need to protect Israel, we need to defend Israel, let's start with having troops on our borders defending our civilians instead of having troops outside of our borders taking hilltops.
In the West Bank.
Yeah. Also, the idea that, we're going to get, that we're going to base our national security on force alone. If you do this, you need to win 24/7 forever. It's enough one morning you don't perform well. We saw the results. Mm-hmm. And so, but I would argue even more than that. One more thing that is very, very important when we talk about October 7 to keep in mind is that for many, many years, the Israeli deliberate policy was to split Gaza from the West Bank, Hamas from the PA, with the attempt to weaken the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and strengthening Hamas. There's even this segment on Israeli TV where Smotrich, who was today our Minister of Finance, said that Hamas is an asset and the Palestinian Authority is a liability.
Didn't Bibi make a deal with Qatar to help Hamas?
Bibi was definitely part of that trend, of course. Why? Because no one from the international community would force us to negotiate with Hamas because they're a terrorist organization. But they will force us with PA, so we need to weaken them to make them irrelevant. So if we want to prevent a Palestinian state, we need to split them, strengthening Hamas, weakening the ones who are willing to negotiate with us, right? That has been the policy, yeah? For years.
From a perspective of someone who doesn't want to have a Palestinian state and doesn't give rights to Palestinians, that's smart.
Of course. See how smart it is. 1,200 dead in Israel. Entire families butchered. About 250 hostages. Very smart, huh?
I mean, some people would say that's the price you pay for a greater Israel. Don't you think Smotrich and Ben-Gvir think like that? And some others?
Sadly enough, I think there are, yeah.
I mean, let's not focus...
But this is, But I want to do one last thing I want to say about this because maybe two last things. But just to say that all these things, all these bubbles, all these ideas in Gaza bursted in October 7. But more than anything, I would argue what bursted in October 7 is the entire strategy of Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinians, which is what? In 3 sentences. Squeezing a growing demography, i.e. Palestinians, into a shrinking geography, i.e. the 165 enclaves of Area A and B throughout the West Bank, and then enclave number 166 in Gaza, with the belief that force and technological superiority will allow us to permanently dominate them. That exploded in October 7. Because that is not the recipe for peace and stability. That's the recipe for instability and conflict. Especially if you add to the mix even settlements who are expanding or increasing the pressure on the enclaves in the West Bank, yeah? And that's why I would say that the only way out is rights, and is if both sides walk out of the room with rights and dignity. Yeah? That's why I would argue that if the German government, if the European leadership, if the US government were really into protecting Jewish and Palestinian life, they have to put all their efforts to push a diplomatic resolution of this conflict that addresses, a diplomatic track that addresses the root causes of this conflict. Yeah?
But they don't do that.
Sadly enough, we're not there. But that is what it's going to take to prevent another October 7. That is what's going to take to bring peace and stability to the region. Because at the end of the day, the achievement, the security of achieving Jewish self-determination in our land is interlinked and intertwined with achieving Palestinian self-determination.
Well,
we cannot live at the expense of Palestinians.
Let's not focus on the war in Gaza too much, since I want to talk about the West Bank some more. But there's one common answer from like Israeli friends I have, people we know. Like, okay, yes, October 7th was horrible. It was a massacre, the worst day in many decades for Israel. And yeah, what's happening in Gaza now, what's been done is horrible too. But what's the alternative? What could have we done differently? There's no alternative. We had to do what we are doing after October 7th.
Look, for this, we're going to give...
There was no alternative to the war in Gaza now and what's happening.
There are so many different levels to answer these questions, yeah? There is an alternative of fighting with more respect to the rules of war and to morality, yeah? You don't always have to take a strike. It might be that if a strike has a collateral damage of dozens of civilians, maybe you shouldn't take it. Yeah, for example, just one idea. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't flatten entire neighborhoods. Yeah, there are a few things that we can talk also about how you fight. Yeah, but again, that's maybe for a different day, for hours. Yeah, to actually explain the targeting policies. But we read from former U.S. personnel, people who were involved in the campaign against ISIS and other things. We know that the targeting policies of Israel are much more permissive than the targeting policies of the U.S., for example, in terms of, collateral damage and et cetera. But there's also the deal of the hostages. And now they killed Sinwar. Why not use this as a victory image, as an off-ramp, yeah? And making a deal to bring back the hostages, right? We were always told that this war has two goals, to eliminate Hamas and to bring back the hostages.
Right.
It's very clear to us by now that military force is not going to bring back the hostages. So make a deal. Okay, you were fighting for a year. Do a deal now, bring back the hostages. You betrayed them on October 7th. They were not protected. But you continue to betray them every day since then.
Unless the goal is not to bring back the hostages.
Unless the goal is to build settlements in Gaza.
Yes.
Unless the goal is permanent domination there. Unless the goal is, yeah? Unless you're very cynical and you say to yourself, oh, they don't vote for me, so what do I care? Yeah?
I mean, talking about settlements in Gaza, I just read it yesterday. Far-right leaders from your government, like they want to reestablish Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip. Like the new motto is from the Euphrates to the Nile.
So not from the river to the sea, but from the river to the river.
That's a huge.
That's the promised land in the Bible. Look,
wow.
You know, I'm smiling and laughing about this, but it's not a joke. Yeah, it's the story. I think what we need to understand is that the Israeli radical right had different issues on their shelf. That October 7 became an opportunity to advance. One of them is returning settlements into Gaza. Okay? So way before October 7. Yeah? It's not for no reason that we get to ministers participating in events on this, or we had a conference in Jerusalem months ago where about a dozen ministers, you know, and members of Knesset were celebrating their return to Gaza, yeah, in Jerusalem. It's because that was on the agenda way before October 7. Okay, if you look at the coalition agreement of this government, okay, in 2005, when the disengagement happened, when the settlements from Gaza was evacuated, yeah, settlements from Gaza were evacuated. 4 settlements in the north of West Bank near Jenin were also evacuated. Yeah? Now, in this coalition agreement, there's an agreement to change the laws and allow the resettling of the settlements near Jenin. So undoing the disengagement. They did it. And Orit Struk was today the Minister of Settlements. She said once they voted and changed the law and allowed the return to one of the 4, which is Chomesh, they actually rebuild that settlement now. Yeah, they have a yeshiva there now. She said on camera, ultimately the goal is to get to Gush Katif. It might cost a lot of bodies, but that's where we're going. What a prophecy, huh? Horrendous. There was money, budget allocated in the coalition agreements to what is called the Gush Katif Museum, the museum for the settlements from Gaza. In this coalition agreement before October 7. When Smotrich, in previous government, when Smotrich was sworn in as a minister, where did he take his children, his family, on the morning of being sworn in as a minister? To the Gush Katif Museum, the museum of the settlements in Gaza before 2005. So what I'm trying to show you is this urge has been there before October 7. For them, October 7 is an opportunity.
Right.
Yeah. The same with destroying UNRWA. It has been on the shelf for years. Right? What's this idea? Yeah? That if we're going to kill UNRWA, we're going to kill Palestinian identity, we're going to kill Palestinian collective. What, Palestinians will forget that there were refugees? I'm a Zionist. We Jews were centuries in exile. We didn't have UNRWA. We never forget where we came from. So Palestinians will forget. Well, what's this stupidity? Yeah? The Israeli security establishment for many years has been in favor of UNRWA. Not because UNRWA is the best thing in the world. Because what's the alternative?
I was going to ask, like, what?
Because I'm sure that an education system run by Hamas will actually educate Palestinian children to become great lovers of Zion.
Probably.
Way better.
Probably.
Right? And especially now with the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, banning and ending UNRWA's activities there, it's a crisis on top of crisis on top of crisis.
But have people talked about what's the plan? Like, if they get rid of UNRWA, and it's not that unrealistic. I mean, Trump could be becoming president. The Israeli Knesset wants to label UNRWA a terrorist organization. Like, what's their plan if UNRWA is gone from Gaza? Like, who takes care of the millions of people?
Again, I don't know.
They don't care?
I haven't seen a serious plan, but again, maybe it's because I didn't look enough into this. But I'm just showing you like that these issues have been there for years,
right?
And October 7th is just being used to shove it, to push it past the finishing line. Yeah. Another thing is the dismantling of the Palestinian Authority.
Mm-hmm.
Smotrich wants it for years, right? He says again and again, his life mission is to prevent a Palestinian state.
Mm-hmm.
But now he wants to destroy the Palestinian Authority, hence holding the tax revenues that Israel collects for the Palestinians, the customs, etc. That's part of the big part of budget of the Palestinian Authority, so they cannot pay salaries, so they will collapse. And there are all this, the International Committee has been chasing him again and again, looking for ways out, threatening not to basically back Israeli banks for their cooperation with Palestinian banks in terms of terrorist financing. So to bring the Palestinian economy to collapse, not allowing work permits for Palestinians in Israel, so Palestinian economy will collapse. The guy is doing everything, almost everything possible, to try to get rid of the Palestinian Authority. Again, it's been there before, but now October 7th is being used for this.
But going back to the resettlement plans of Gaza, like how seriously do we have to take those plans? Because it's not official Israeli policy yet, correct?
Emphasis on the yet. Now, I don't think it's around the corner for tomorrow, but I would not underestimate the possibility that this will materialize to become a reality. Many, many people were laughing at the settlers in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. We now have about 700,000 settlers in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Yeah? So I don't think Netanyahu wants it. I also think there is different levels of settlements back in Gaza. Yeah? There is the settlements. There is even replacing Gaza City. And there is the settlements only in the north, what was called the Tochemet HaTzfonit. Yeah, in the north of Bet Laia, Bet Hanun, there were 3 settlements, Ele Sinai, Nisani, Dugit. Yeah? So kind of like reducing the territory of Gaza. Yeah? Teaching Palestinians a lesson that that's the result of, that's the price of you inflicting on us the pain of an event like the massacres of October 7. Yeah. If this war will continue, down the road, I think every day that goes by, the chances that we will see settlements in Gaza are increasing.
Do you think that's the red line for the Americans, for the Europeans?
I remember when Israel announced that it's going to create a buffer zone of about 1 kilometer and basically erase everything that is there. Some people said that this is unacceptable, red line, da-da-da. I think if you would take aerial photos of Gaza today, satellite images, you would see that as, if not fully implemented, at least being implemented by now, right now. So saying that as a red line is one thing. The question is what leverage is attached to make sure that this red line is not crossed. Generally speaking, I think what we see today, the escalation on all fronts, is a direct result of our failure to achieve a ceasefire, which is exactly what October 7 is, a direct result of our failure of achieving a 2-state solution. And it's not that we didn't know what it means, what a ceasefire, what it takes for a ceasefire, or what it takes for a 2-state solution. We just didn't make it happen. And we are now living with the consequences of our failure. And what I very much fear, is that the calls for a ceasefire today, the red lines of settlements in Gaza, are hollow slogans just like the slogans of a two-state solution 2, 3, or 4 years ago were.
I mean, the people who make these plans for resettlements of Gaza, they call themselves Zionists as well. You just call yourself a Zionist. Like changing perspectives. I mean, you know many people, Palestinians, other people in the world, they call Zionists fascists. Can you explain to these people and like the German audience what's the difference between a Zionist like you and a Zionist like Smotrich and Ben Gvir and others?
Oh. Zionism is the movement for the self-determination of the Jewish people, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people.
Right.
There's a whole spectrum of where you stand on this. But I think for me, it's very clear. I believe the Jews have a right to self-determination within the land of Israel. I just refuse to accept that the only way I would be able to exercise and realize that right is if I strip my Palestinian neighbors from the exact same right. I would actually argue that a position like this is an anti-Zionist position.
Oh.
Because it undermines the legitimacy of the fulfillment of Jewish self-determination. It is one thing if what we are presenting to the world and to Palestinians and to Jews and to everyone, that the two nations, the two people can live side by side and fulfill their collective rights. It's another thing if we try to argue that the only way we will be able to fulfill our right is if forever we strip millions of Palestinians from their rights. Yeah? That is a position that argues that for eternity, Jewish liberation is interlinked with subjugation of Palestinians. And that is something I'm not willing to accept and I'm against.
It's kind of funny that like anti-Zionist activists, like they're fighting these extremist Zionists for probably some good reasons, but you call Smotrich and company basically anti-Zionists.
I believe they're undermining the achievement of Jewish rights, yeah.
So,
and of Palestinian rights, obviously.
Right.
But ultimately, they're... I think this is the... One of the reasons, or maybe to say it in a different way, I think the political math, yeah, that this Israeli government is selling to the world is Israel's right to exist equals to the right of Israel to dominate Palestinians forever.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sentence. The Jewish people have an exclusive and indisputable right to all parts of the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Is that our right to exist equals to our right to dominate and oppress Palestinians forever. And that's the biggest delegitimizing political math to the existence of Israel that you can present to normal human beings. Because if you are a Jewish supremacist like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and you are faced with this equation, you say, obviously Israel has a right to exist, and obviously Israel has a right to dominate Palestinians forever. But if you would go in front of almost every normal human being who believes in basic equality, human rights, yeah, liberal values, if that's the case, then Israel has no right to exist.
So it's kind of ironic, like
that's where they're leading us.
But it's kind of
they are leading us to a reality that will undermine Israel completely.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic that the German government, by supporting your government, by saying, okay, we're the Existenzrecht, you know, the right to exist of Israel is our foremost policy, and because of the raison, the state, the reason of state, the German reason of state, Staatsräson, we have to support them, but it's actually undermining the right to exist of Israel?
I would always distinguish. You know, I come from a religious background, so I call it kosher Israel and non-kosher Israel. Yeah, there's kosher Israel within its internationally recognized borders, within the Green Line, and I would want everyone to increase and embolden, you know, its relationship with proper Israel. But in the same conviction, we need to reject non-kosher Israel, which is the settlements and the occupation. So I would want Friends of Israel, and I believe Friends of Israel must unapologetically support Israel within its recognized borders and reject Israel outside its legal and recognized borders.
It's funny.
That's the package, the way I see it.
It's funny that you say the internationally recognized borders of Israel.
Yeah, the Green Line.
Does Israel recognize these borders?
No. Formally, no. Again, the Jewish people have an exclusive and indisputable right to all parts of the land of Israel.
Which borders?
The government will promote and develop settlements in all parts of the land of Israel. Yeah? You completely put together the land, the historical land of Israel, and within kind of like the Nile and all these kind of stuff, yeah? Like even in the most expansionist version of, you know, of the biblical fantasy, so to speak, right? That's not the recognized borders of Israel, no. That's a violation of one of the most important fundamental prohibitions of international law, the prohibition of acquisition of territory by force, annexation. And you guys in Europe are dealing with another annexation.
Yeah.
Yeah? Now, I'm not trying to argue in a simplistic way that Russia, Ukraine is Israel, Palestine. No, different conflicts has different contexts, etc., etc. But from the perspective of the prohibition of international law, annexation is annexation. And if it's wrong for Ukraine, it's wrong for Israel, Palestine.
But
simply put.
Does Israel, do they tell you, is there like an officially recognized border from the Israeli perspective, or these words?
The official is there is no reckon. No.
Okay.
As far as I know.
And what's it like, because we were talking about resettlement of Gaza and annexation and all this, what's the difference between that and colonialism?
I'm not a scholar of colonialism, so
It's like we had Francesca Albanese here, for example. She said that's like settler colonialism. What's been happening? You want to discuss that, or should we move on?
I'm not a scholar of these issues, so
okay.
Sorry for this.
Going back to the Westbank,
but for me, it's very clear that, you know, my instinct is that no doubt that there are, you know, the Jewish people to the land of Israel, it's not the same connection as British people to the gold mines in South Africa.
Going back to the Westbank, and I had one more question regarding the settlers in the IDF. I mean, from an international perspective, settlers are criminals, right? Like when Israelis live,
could be. I'm not a lawyer exactly whether the responsibility is on them specifically or not, but it could be. Yeah, it's definitely the settlement is a war crime. Yeah,
exactly. A settlement is an international crime, a war crime. Yeah. So a settler would be part of a crime, of a war crime, a war criminal. Why are they even allowed, if it's a crime, to serve in an army? Because Israel doesn't recognize it as a crime?
No. Obviously, from the Israeli perspective, yeah, we distinguish between settlements and outposts. Yeah, which settlements are the official ones that are built and
the outposts are not settlements yet.
The outposts are settlements that are built against Israeli planning laws and regulations.
Okay.
Even though majority of them are built by government authorities. So, yeah, it's not that the outpost is something that the settlers do against the system. Yeah? The outposts are basically a criminal enterprise run by the state of Israel. Yeah? The government, in many cases, if not at most, the government finances, sponsors infrastructure, connects them to electricity, running water, military protection, yeah? Public transportation, many, many things, yeah? So in Israel, we do this distinction in our conversation, but under international law, an Israeli civilian entity in the occupied territories is illegal. It's a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention.
So this year, the Hague, like they made, it's not a ruling, but since the United Nations Parliament, they asked to rule on the illegality or legality of the occupation in the Westbank itself. And the German government, for example, they were always talking about that the settlements that are happening, that we've been talking about, are illegal in international law. But now the ICJ made it clear the entire Israeli occupation itself is illegal. Israel always
unlawful presence, yeah.
It's
illegal,
illegal, unlawful.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, Israel always said for decades, no, it's a temporary occupation. We're going to leave at some point, and that's why it's legal, it's lawful. The international court said, nope, that's bullshit. It's illegal itself. Did this change anything? That the occupation itself is illegal?
The International Court of Justice, the ICJ,
yes,
I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, July 19th, published the advisory opinion. And the advisory opinion said a few things that are very interesting and important. One is, as you say, exactly, that it's not just that the settlements are illegal, but the occupation is illegal. The advisory opinion also says that Israel is in violation of the prohibition of non-acquisition of territory by force. Meaning Israel is violating the prohibition of annexation. In a way that annexation, it's not happening or will happen in the future. Happened. Yeah?
Already happened.
If I'm not mistaken, and speaking from memory here, that big parts of the West Bank or something like that, yeah? Probably referring to Area C. So this is not only East Jerusalem. Yeah, some people think that, annexation is, ceremony of cutting ribbons and, yeah? No. Treating the territory as your own, changing the geography, the demography, building settlements, infrastructure, yeah? Connecting it, uniting the authorities that rule over the West Bank and Israel, etc. Yeah, that's annexation. The other thing that the court said, if I'm not mistaken, is that Israel needs to end the occupation. I think the wording is as rapidly as possible.
Yes.
Then the court also said that Israel is engaging in coercive environment and forcible transfer. And then the court went further into a place that I didn't expect them to. I wasn't sure that, the main advisory opinion will go to. But the court said that Israel is in violation of Article 3 of the International Convention of the on the elimination of all of racial discrimination, of all forms of racial discrimination. Yeah, that's the exact, if I remember right, the exact formulation of the convention. And Article 3 basically says that, talks about kind of like the extreme versions of racial discrimination being racial segregation and apartheid.
They didn't use the word apartheid, but
they said the violation of Article 3. And you can see that in the individual declaration, the president of the court argues that it's apartheid. Also apartheid, the German judge, Nolte, I think, in his declaration argues that it's only racial segregation. But for apartheid, they couldn't rule. They didn't have enough information in front of the court. So I think this is definitely, a very, very, this is a milestone. And I really hope that this will not go, unnoticed, and it will not be pushed away as business as usual. And I think the minimum that we have is if a country, claims to stand for international law, the minimum is align your position with what the court has said.
Well,
then
funny you say that. The German government, they recognize what the court has said, but it seems to go unnoticed. It seems to be business as usual because the German Foreign Ministry, for example, in public statements, all they say, the settlements are illegal, Yehuda. They don't go to the occupation is illegal now. I mean, if you press them, they kind of, they recognize that, but it seems to me that it's still business as usual, despite the international court.
I think the court has also when the court talks about the third state responsibility, the court goes as far as, and I'm quoting now, to take steps to prevent trade or investment relations that assist in the maintenance of the illegal situation created by Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory.
So basically sanctioning and boycotting.
No, that sounds to me as, I would say, something like a ban on trade with settlements.
Right.
Yeah. Again, rejecting illegal Israel. Rejecting non-kosher Israel. Yeah.
Like right now, the
settlements.
The European Union only, you have to, if you want to import from the settlements, you just have to put a sticker on it and say, it's... You
cannot label it as made in Israel. You need to say that it's made... Yeah,
but it's not banned to go to Europe and the US.
It says you cannot assist. You need to take steps to prevent trade and investment.
Are you seeing that from the European Union?
So I again, for me, this is something very, very basic, right? If settlements are illegal, if settlements are an obstacle to peace, and I really believe it, and if we believe in two states, and I'm what I would call myself a two-state extremist, I believe the only way out is two states where both people get individual and collective rights, where we have full equality. But if we believe in two states, and we know and we understand that settlements are against two states, so why are we trading with settlements? Why are we supporting them? Why are we assisting the settlement economy?
Tell us.
I think now it's not anymore just a political idea, a moral stand. It's almost a legal obligation, I would argue.
But what do Americans and Europeans tell you? I mean, you probably raise this issue all the time. There's no... I will ask them, I guess. But the rule...
You get more of a chance than me to ask them.
I don't know about that. People are fighting that. But ending... The court said the occupation has to end ASAP. As soon as possible, as rapidly as possible, right?
Yeah, but taking into consideration that there are, things need to... Yeah, it's not like tomorrow, yeah? Because...
But not like in 20 years either. Ending the occupation means ending the settlements, correct?
Obviously.
How do you...
Ending the settlement is not enough. Ending the occupation is more.
But it also means that 700,000 Jewish settlers have to leave the Westbank.
By the way, the ICJ also talks about the reparations. That Israel needs to compensate Palestinians for losses they suffered from settlements and the occupation. So we haven't covered everything, and again, I'm not a legal scholar, so I don't want to, But yeah,
we covered it in other interviews. Kayam Boss and all this.
But look,
But how would you? How would you?
At the end of the day, yeah, anyone who tries to argue that we are in the occupied territories for security purposes, yeah, because we need to protect Israel. My demand will be very simple. If you want to argue this is for security, tomorrow, 12 o'clock, all the settlers come back home and we keep the military there. Mm-hmm. You know what? I'll give you 2 more days. Not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. Mm-hmm. All the settlers and buses back home, and we keep the military. until the Palestinians become Swedes, yeah, or Swiss, yeah. How many times have we heard that talking point? So we don't have a partner. We have the military, but we don't have the settlement. As long we continue to take land, as long we continue to expand the settlement, we prove that this is not just about security. That this is a land grab project.
But like, since you're a two-state extremist, how do you imagine getting 700,000 settlers and probably even more at what point that's going to be out of there? Won't they fight tooth and nails? I mean, they will consider this their home. Like, how do you remove almost 1 million people from there?
So what's your alternative?
I don't know.
What's your alternative? Expelling millions of Palestinians out? What's the alternative?
So we have to expel people.
What's the alternative? We haven't brought Israel to end its occupation over 22% of mandatory Palestine, which is the West Bank and Gaza. We're going to get Israel to dissolve itself? What's your alternative?
I don't know. What is, I mean, we're talking about Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Ben Gvir, is he officially a terrorist or like a former terrorist?
He was convicted in, if I remember right, it was supporting a terrorist organization.
And he's the minister of
national security. He is responsible over the police.
Yeah, like the minister of interior and what we call it here, like in minister, probably.
No, we have a minister of interior.
Okay.
And we have, it's two different things in Israel.
But he's the boss of the police.
Yeah.
And then there's Smotrich, he calls himself a fascist.
A proud
fascist.
I think it was a proud fascist, if I'm not mistaken.
And he's the minister of finance.
Yeah.
Like the Israeli Christian Lindner. And also he has another job.
He is another minister. He's a minister within the Ministry of Defense.
What?
So this government, from its founding, embarked basically on two revolutions. One is inside Israel, what was called a judicial overhaul, where you saw hundreds of thousands of Israelis, marching in the streets before October 7 and protesting the judicial overhaul, because they basically wanted to rip apart any remains of checks and balances and democratic institutions within Israel. For different reasons, by the way. For Netanyahu, because he didn't want to go to prison and to remain in power. For the ultra-Orthodox, because the courts might force them to go to the draft, so we need to rip off the courts. And for the national religious settlers, it's because they want to move to formal annexation, expropriation on a mass scale of private Palestinian land for settlements, to rip apart the courts and get rid of, even the tiny obstacles that the Israeli courts put on their way to formal annexation of all the land. So you had this complete alignment of interests of the three pillars of the traditional Netanyahu coalition, Likud, his party, ultra-Orthodox and national religious settlers. That was the pursuit for the revolution inside Israel, the judicial overhaul. But there's another revolution in the West Bank that people did not march in the streets against, that got way less attention, which is transforming the Israeli regime over the West Bank. And that was done with appointing Bezalel Smotrich as a minister within the Ministry of Defense. Under him, there's what is called the Settlement Administration. He appointed his friend, co-founder of Regavim, Yehuda Shaul. Regavim is the settler NGO that campaigns against Palestinian presence and development in Area C of the West Bank, or as they would call it, against illegal construction. Right. For some reason, the illegal construction by settlers and outposts is not a problem, but the Palestinian illegal construction in Area C because they don't get permits, because, what is it, about 97, 98% of their permit requests get rejected because the Israeli army, the Israeli government doesn't want to have Palestinians in Area C, yeah? That's very problematic and needs to be demolished and, get rid of. Obviously also campaigning for what they call sovereignty, i.e. formal annexation. So what happened now is that the settlement administration, which is a civilian kind of like body of Israel within the Ministry of Defense, today has taken away from the IDF.
As the occupying army?
Exactly.
Right.
Most of the powers over most civilian affairs issues in the West Bank. So you basically had what is called a transfer of powers. The powers over civilian affairs in the West Bank were transferred from the military to the Israeli civilian ministry. Yeah?
And civilian affairs concerns settlers and Palestinians?
And some issues only settlers, and then some issues also Palestinians.
Okay.
So planning and construction now is under Smotrich. Smotrich basically is the governor of the West Bank. Okay? Enforcement of construction laws, demolitions on Palestinians. He decides.
Wait. A fascist and an extremist settler is the governor of the West Bank now.
Yeah. De facto governor, yeah. And basically...
wow.
Land issues, e-controls, yeah? Planning, e-controls. A lot of things, basically, yeah? Some of the resources, basically business, many things that are related to civilian affairs, that's him now.
So is it naive to think like if a settler wants to get something done, wants to build another housing unit, Smotrich is going to be like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And like if Palestinian wants to build something.
So Palestinians were not allowed to build housing units already before Smotrich.
Okay.
Right? And settlers were allowed to build housing units in the West Bank also before Smotrich.
So nothing's changed?
No. But now, no. In this change, there are two things. There is evolutionary changes and there is revolutionary changes.
Okay.
So I'll just give you an example of an evolutionary change.
Right.
It's not for no reason when we look at the year plus since this government, took office, even more. We have records of advancement of housing units and settlements in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, together more than about 40,000 housing units. We have records of declaration of state land, which is one of the main land grab techniques where we misuse old Ottoman laws after the Crimea War to basically strip Palestinians from their rights over the land. So we have records in that since the time of Oslo. We have about 70 outposts were basically retroactively approved de facto by Smotrich because they created a new standing, kind of like a new legal status, so to speak, via government decision, of an outpost that is in the process of approval. And about 70 outposts were declared as such, and that means that there is going to be no enforcement against illegal construction there. That now officially the government can give them funding, even though they're unauthorized still, yeah? They're kind of like illegal even under Israeli law. The government can hook them up to electricity, to water, to infrastructure, formally, yeah? It was done, informal. Now formally budgets, and don't forget, if I'm almost quoting Smotrich, since the Minister of Finance is from the same party of the minister within the Ministry of Defense, being sarcastic, it's him, it's the same guy, budgets are not the issue.
Oh.
Right?
Right.
We're talking about a peak in displacing and forcibly transferring Palestinians in the West Bank. We're talking about a peak in settler violence. Okay, if we look at the UN numbers, 2021, we had an average of about 1 attack per day by settlers against Palestinians. 2022, we had about 2 attacks per day. 2023, up to October 7, we had about 3 attacks per day. And after October 7, it surged to 7 attacks average per day. And now it's down, stabilized on more or less 4 attacks per day.
So the evolutionary change under Smotrich, what you were talking about, means more outposts, more settlements, more permits, more displacements of Palestinians, more violence against
More
Palestinians.
everything bad almost, yeah?
What's the revolutionary change then?
One more thing for this, I would say.
Okay.
Before that, budgets, budgets, budgets.
Money.
Don't forget. That's still in the evolution. Yeah?
More money.
About 20... I'm just giving you one example, yeah? Because there are millions being poured for everything there, yeah?
Right.
Because again, he's also the Minister of Finance. But about 20% of the budgets of road construction for the next 5 years of the State of Israel go to highways of settlements.
Oh.
Because the overall goal is to get to 1 million settlers in the West Bank.
Okay.
Yeah? And until today, the settlements are not a viable economic project. About 60% of the workforce commute daily to Israel. If you want to get to the 1 million settlers, you cannot rely only on the ideological hardcore segment of Israeli society. Yeah, their numbers are limited, right? You need the average Israeli to move to the settlement. And how do you do that? By suburbanizing them. Infrastructure, yeah, that's a key here.
Yeah, I always see like the ads that, and it's saying like, why live in Tel Aviv? Because of the high
20
rents.
minutes of the
high
exactly.
rents. Just live in the West Bank or in Judea or in Samaria. It's
20 minutes from Kfar Saba.
cheaper rent.
Yeah, so
It's nice.
but that's why transportation is key. Yeah, it's key. In the last big chunk of investment of billions into transportation was in the West Bank was in the 1990s. Okay. Since Oslo was signed, how many settlers we had then in the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem? 116,000?
Really?
Today we have 500,000. So it's during the days of the peace process, the number of settlers more than tripled in the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem. Yeah? You're making this face. But that can explain exactly why the average Palestinian my age and below, when you tell them peace process, they laugh in your face. Because what they saw is Israel eating the West Bank piece by piece. Yeah? And that has a profound impact on consciousness and political, etc., in the Palestinian side. But put that aside. So since then, since we had this massive investment in the 1990s, settlers have tripled, numbers, Palestinians doubled. That means huge constraint in infrastructure. And if we want to get to the 1 million settlers, and that's the goal of Smotrich, and that's the goal, yeah? You need to invest billions into infrastructure of settlements. So again, this is the evolution. What's the revolution?
More outposts, more permits, more displacements of Palestinians, more violence against Palestinians, more money for the settlers.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the revolutionary change under Smotrich?
Several things. But first and foremost, what we spoke earlier about transforming the entire regime. It's not being run anymore by the military. It's being run by the civilian system. Not only that, even the legal advisors are civilians. So we're not anymore talking about military lawyers where Smotrich cannot influence who he appoints, who give the legal advice to what is allowed and not allowed in the West Bank. And again, it's not that the military lawyers were actually, protecting Palestinians fully and following international law, as we've seen. Settlements, many violations. But still, it's different when Smotrich appoints his neighbors, quote unquote, or it's the military. Yeah? So you transform the entire regime over the West Bank. One. Another thing, I'll give you an example. For many, many years, settlers have been campaigning what is called the battle over Area C. So under Oslo, the West Bank was divided to 3 zones, right? A, B, and C, where A and B are almost 40% of the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority has some footprint. And Area C is about 60%, complete control of Israel, basically open spaces, settlements, the highways connecting them. What is not the bigger urban and suburbs of the Palestinians. Now, in Area C, vast majority of the settlers live, basically all the settlements, almost all the settlers. Yeah, I'm saying almost because there might be like one outpost that kind of like infringes on Area B with one house. I'm not sure, but basically the settlers live in Area C, the ones that are not in East Jerusalem. So about 500,000, and about 300,000 Palestinians, more or less. Now, the IDF, now the settlers have been talking about the Palestinians are taking over Area C, building illegally, as if the fish are taking over the sea. Yeah, that has been like a huge campaign. In the past few years, they don't say that anymore. In the last few years, what they say is the battle over open spaces. Why? Because we are now undoing Oslo. We're transcending Oslo. And the political idea is that if we say the battle over Area C, we are reinforcing the paradigm of Oslo, that only Area C is ours. But we know that God gave us everything, right? But we should, as Israel, in their eyes, we should claim everything. Everything is ours. Palestinians should not be contained only to Area A and B. They should be contained only to the built-up areas in Area A and B. And the open areas in A and B should be ours. Now, Israel operates. There are incursions of Israeli army into Area A, almost thousands annually, yeah? But it's being done for security purposes. What Smotrich came and said in Parliament last year is that we need to change the way we understand security. Because the way it's interpreted today and allows us to go into Area A and operate is in a very limited way, in a narrow way. We have intelligence, these guys are organizing an attack or whatever. What we need to do is to understand that security needs to be enlarged to national security, where Palestinian contiguity is a threat to our national security. So we need to preserve Palestinian fragmentation. And once our cabinet will decide on that, we will go into Area B and demolish Palestinian construction in what is called the open areas outside of the... Now, I see your face, yes. Now, this was not done yet. That's a plan, and he's very vocal about it. But there is already 3% of the West Bank, which is defined as Area B, called the Agreed-Upon Nature Reserve, was given to the Palestinians as Area B in the late 90s, in 1987. And the idea was to prevent their development there by declaring it a nature reserve, where what Smotrich, what the settlers are saying, hey, they're not enforcing laws. They are allowing Palestinian communities in that area to expand. So we need to go in and do it. And the Israeli cabinet took a decision, and the Central Command General signed a military order, and we now have the IDF enforcing planning and construction laws in parts of Area B. That is a revolutionary, for example, yeah? And there are many more things. Yeah, but I see that we are almost out of time. But there are many, many things, and the last thing I want to say is that this transfer of power from the military to civilian authorities is not just theoretical. We are in a place where it could be that tomorrow, the guys of Smotrich, which is Hillel Roth, who is called the deputy head of the civil administration, he's not a deputy, he's the head, basically, and he's a civil servant, and the head of the settlement administration, Yehuda Eliyahu, the friends of Smotrich, they can tomorrow maybe can do what is happening now in Sheikh Jarrah in the West Bank, meaning taking Jewish property from before 1948, kicking out the Palestinians, and giving the houses to settlers. We might face that now in downtown Hebron. We talk about the authorities that are being transferred to him. Yeah, that's one of the things he can do. And we can go on and on and on. Land survey, a settlement of title. Only 1/3 of the land in the West Bank, we don't have the time now to go for 15 minutes to explain land in the West Bank, but only 1/3 of the land in the West Bank is registered in what is called a tabu, the land registration. Israel halted, froze the survey in 1967 that the British and the Jordanians were running for different reasons. Settlers want to restart it again. That means about 60% of the land in Area C is up for grab. And the default is what is not proven to be private becomes so-called state land, public land. Goes to Israel. What is it? 99.76% of so-called state land that was allocated was to settlers in the West Bank. And I don't see Palestinians probably politically cooperating with the Israeli survey. So that means default land goes to Israel. Yeah. This could lead to massive changes, yeah? Gigantic strategic changes in the West Bank.
Well, thanks for being here. I mean, I'm sure we could have been going on for hours and hours, but next time, let's see each other in Israel or Palestine, and you show us what's happening instead of just talking about it. Hans is waiting for the questions. One final quick question, maybe make it quick. Israel is also in southern Lebanon right now, and southern Lebanon is north of the West Bank.
But it's not connected.
Right.
There's no contiguity.
But is there are there also settlement plans, resettlement plans of southern Lebanon?
There is in Israel the movement for settlements in Lebanon, yeah? I'm laughing because the first Lebanon War in 1982, when I was born, there was actually few families from the settler movement who tried to settle in. I think it was 83. They called the settlement the Wagons of Fire. Merkavat Ha'esh. They tried to settle, it didn't work for them in 1983. So there is people today who are talking about this. I would pay more attention to the plans to resettle Gaza than there, but it's important to understand that there are people who are talking about this.
Yehuda, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Let's see what Hans has to offer for you.
Hi.
Hi.
The general reaction in the chat was, why aren't there more Israelis who think and argue like him? So take that as a compliment.
I think this is the toughest job we have, is to convince Israeli Jewish society one by one to this.
How successful would you judge your movement if you take that as a serious challenge? Under the conditions of war, normally if you have an exterior enemy, on the interior level, it unites and reunites in a conservative way.
Yeah. So again, I think as you said, I think human nature is that people with privileges don't just wake up in the morning and decide to give up their privileges. Yeah. Something needs to change. Something needs to change in the cost-benefit calculation. Yeah. But still, I think, while on one hand, I don't believe we're going to see a majority of Israeli Jews marching in the streets against the occupation for moral reasons. Yeah. Interest is a different story. Yeah, but for moral reasons, like me, like I am. Still, I believe we can create, and I think our job is to create as significant as possible a minority that will oppose occupation based on morality, on moral principles, with the hope that when the interests will change, together with the interest-based opposition, we can become a majority and ultimately will end the occupation.
So your focus, as I understood the discussion you had with Thilo, your focus is more the question of occupation than in the question which in Germany moves so many minds, the death toll in Gaza. For you, from an analytical point of view, occupation is the more serious issue, right?
Look, as I said, I think October 7, in my eyes, was more than was was a direct result of our failure of ending occupation and ending the conflict. Yeah? So obviously now as we sit, the more immediate thing is about a ceasefire in Gaza, ceasefire in Lebanon, yeah? But let's not forget, ending occupation, achieving a two-state solution, what's happening in the West Bank is also very strategic. Because at the end of the day, in order to end this and tackle the root causes of the violence we are experiencing now, what happens in the West Bank is very crucial and important.
Yeah. This, in a way, leads directly to the first audience question. The USA, as well as the German government, still stick to the two-state solution, Oslo, 1, 2, 3. Other voices say that's like riding a dead horse. What's your opinion on that? Is the two-state resolution still a valid vision for solving the conflict?
So first of all, I'm not sure that Oslo was two states. Yeah?
It was the idea, if I understand right, the idea of two, let's call it safe havens for Muslim Arabs as well as for Jews, right?
If you read the text of Oslo, a Palestinian state is not there. Okay?
Okay.
The state of Palestine is not in Oslo. And I think in that sense, a Palestinian state, the way I understand it, meaning a sovereign Palestinian state, is a new idea in that sense. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, the Europeans are talking about this only in the late 1990s. The first U.S. president who says Palestinian state is George W. Bush II. Yeah. So this is after Oslo. But saying that, I would say this. I call myself a two-state extremist for a very simple reason.
A what? Sorry?
Two-state extremist.
Ah, interesting.
Because I believe that the only relevant paradigm is two states. And for me, I'll say it in a shorter way and maybe then in a longer way if we have the time. I don't know what is our time frame.
Up to you.
But if I don't envision Palestinians defeating Israel militarily, and I don't envision that, and if I don't want Israel defeating Palestinians, meaning mass population transfer to outside of the West Bank and Gaza, what I'm left with is a strategic stalemate where both sides are in the room in a genuine way negotiating up a compromise. And we have two states. Yeah?
Yeah.
Look, I don't understand the political math of a one secular democracy or a one binational state. It's not that I'm against
sorry. No,
it.
I want to include that question because it came in the context. You know, Omri Böhm's vision of the Haifa state. So the one state as a bicultural, bi-ethnic state, to religion, to ethnic, to cultural groups with same rights under the roof of one state. What is it? Is it utopia or is it realistic?
It's not even utopia. It's even more fantasy than utopia. Again, I'm going to argue now from a realist perspective, not from an ideological perspective. Okay. We have 76 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, where there is a clear Jewish majority within Israel, we still don't have full equality to Palestinians as a minority.
Right.
So Israeli Jews will agree to give up their demographic superiority, become a minority, because today, between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordanian River, we are a minority demographically. Oh, sorry. Also, the right of return, we're going to bring millions of Palestinian refugees back. So we're going to become a minority of like 30%, and we're going to have equality? From an Israeli Jewish perspective, what are you smoking? I'd like some of it. It sounds great stuff. I think as political activists, as political creatures, we have responsibility. We can have our head above with visions, but we need to have 2 legs, 2 feet on the ground.
Yes, but coming to that point, when you say, okay, I'm a 2-state extremist, and you call the Republic Haifa not even utopia, but fantasy, how realistic are you, Mr. Extremist, when you have a nationalist Israel government right now who say, we will never accept a Palestinian state? Isn't the idea of a two-state vision as much fantasy as the Republic Haifa under the circumstances being?
I will double down on your question.
Okay.
And I will say that a permanent domination over Palestinians, preventing a state of Palestine, has been the national project of the State of Israel for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the second Rabin government I'm willing to exempt from this. Still, I don't understand the political math. You haven't brought Israel to end its rule, its occupation over 22% of mandatory Palestine, because that's what 2 states based on 67 borders on the Green Line.
Yeah.
And that is very, very important for our audience to understand. 2 states based on the 1967 borders is not partitioning 50-50%.
Mm-hmm.
It's 78% of mandatory Palestine Israel, 22% of mandatory Palestine. So you haven't brought the end of the occupation over 22%. You're going to bring Israel to dissolve itself? Why do you think that undoing Israel is easier than ending occupation over 22%? Like a good Jew, I answered you in a question.
I have to triple down. I have to triple down because I can't answer that question, as I'm, number 1, not a Jew, number 2, a journalist, and we ask the questions, and you are providing the answers.
So again, what I'm trying to say, it's not that I believe that 2 states is around the corner. Hell no.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have an enormous political battle here to achieve it.
Yeah, but yeah, okay.
But I don't think the cards we are faced are between 1 or 2 states. I think the cards we are faced are between mass population transfer, the vision of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, or 2 states.
So would you support the position of the German government, especially the foreign minister, who says nearly once a week, sometimes twice a week, says the security, the safety of the state of Israel is depending of the vision of a state of Palestine. Is that a true position? Would you support that?
As I said earlier in this interview, I really, really believe that the fulfillment and the security and safety of Jewish self-determination in our land is dependent on achieving Palestinian self-determination.
Okay.
On a very, very deep level, I don't see myself as someone who is fighting the Palestinian struggle for liberation or as someone who is fighting in solidarity with Palestinians. At the core, I see myself as someone who is fighting the Israeli struggle.
In the interview with Thilo, Thilo mentioned the reason of state, which is, since Merkel, official German governmental position, saying the safety of the state of Israel is, without discussion, it is a reason of state for Germany. What's your point of view on that statement? Is it a positive one or is it a limiting burden?
I think, like many things, the question is how do you interpret and how do you use it? Yeah? And if that's a reason why Germany needs to support Netanyahu and Smotrich, I think that's a very problematic thing because that's not what I believe is the interest of Israel. But if that's, yeah, if that's a way of Germany of taking responsibility, yeah, for the horrendous crime of the Holocaust against the Jewish people, of standing in what it sees or what one sees as the interest of Israel within confines of international law, within moral boundaries, is a different story.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What's your next question? What's your perception of the overall reporting of Israeli media since the beginning of the war in Gaza?
I have no doubt that Israeli media bears significant responsibility for a lot of the silence in our society regarding what we are doing to Palestinians and what we are doing in Gaza. It's, you know, put aside Haaretz, local call, yeah, few outlets, the mainstream media, you can barely see any Palestinian voices from Gaza. If they're not Palestinians who are, you know, blaming Hamas for everything. In some more more right-wing outlets, sometimes you could see the destruction in Gaza, but as something that is celebrated. Yeah. Again, as I said, I think it's not for no reason that, you know, 20 plus years ago, we started a group called Breaking the Silence by soldiers who came back from the occupied territories and thought it's important for Israeli society to understand what is being done in its name. Because back then the media was not reporting. That is 1,000 times worse post the massacres of October 7.
Would Israeli media be free if they decided to focus more the situation of Palestinians in Gaza and Westbank? Would they be free to report on that in Israel or not?
I think today it's more self-censorship and wanting not to piss off audiences than state censorship.
Do you have any recommendation for journalists and media work in Germany regarding the reporting on the conflict?
I don't know enough about the German context. And, sorry, I don't speak German. You know, I can't really, you know, evaluate the reporting here. What I can say is that I think it's important to also have the reports from Gaza to center the reality there, and make sure that Palestinians appear also as human beings, not just as numbers, not just as terrorists, not just, like of humanizing every civilian, in our region, of being honest, of factual. I think these things are very, very important. And for at least in the Israeli media, Palestinians are completely, in most media, Palestinians are dehumanized significantly.
Next question. How do you judge the fact that even persons of Jewish religious belief can be called or are called anti-Semitic when they just criticize the acting of the current government? Is that true?
I think it's important to say a few things on this. First of all is that anti-Semitism, real anti-Semitism exists. And real anti-Semitism is on the rise also. And we must do everything possible to curb anti-Semitism, to fight it. But it's also important to keep in mind, and I would argue that it's part of the move of Israel from occupation to annexation. From the hasbara of this is temporary, we don't want to do this, but when you have a government guidelines that we have exclusive right to all the land, you can't say those excuses are not there anymore. And obviously, there is a very, very cynical misuse of the fight against anti-Semitism to silence legitimate criticism of Israel. And I think that is a completely unacceptable trend, that is not only problematic in terms of allowing proper discussion about policies of the State of Israel, but it's also harmful to the fight against real anti-Semitism. Because if everything is anti-Semitism, then nothing is anti-Semitism.
Have you personally, be called an anti-Semitist?
And one of the things, it's interesting that you're bringing this question because we do see more and more voices in the Israeli hard right and the Israeli right where Israeli human rights organizations are being classified as anti-Semites, as kind of like saying anti-Semitic stuff, as, using the IHRA definition for anti-Semitism, which is kind of like mainly centered on Israel issues, so using this to silence debate and discussion, even inside Israel. And I think that says a lot about those forces and about the vehicles they are using, So I see that as a very, very dangerous development, as I said, for Jews all over, for the fight against real anti-Semitism, and also for the ability to have decent discussion and conversation about Israeli policy vis-a-vis Palestinians. Now, again, if there is real anti-Semitism, one should confront it with everything we've got. But the inflation, the misuse, the systematic misuse of this to try to silence a legitimate conversation in Israel, I think is extremely problematic.
Excuse me for coming back to my original question. Have you in person been called an anti-Semite? And if so, and I can imagine it happened, what is your reaction on that?
I don't have a clear recollection of a time that I was called an anti-Semite. I actually, again, it's from memory, so I don't want to kind of like, but I think there was a case where an Israeli member of Knesset used the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism to attack breaking the silence in Israel. Again, I'm speaking from memory. I'm not sure. That's why I'm a bit reluctant to go down there. But I do have a vivid memory of a case where an Israeli right-wing, like extreme right-wing pro-settler kind of like group used the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism to attack B'Tselem, which is the largest Israeli human rights organization that deals with the occupied territories, and kind of like frame their work and their message as anti-Semitic. So I do have in mind, and in my memory, few cases where it happened to Israeli Jews. Okay. And it's just, it just shows you that this is...
It's used as a weapon.
Exactly. It was so trivialized and so problematic, turn into something that you just use in this kind of like in the fist fight. For the political debate and try to, and because they know, that this is kind of like the nuclear option, right? And again, I go back to, I believe the roots here, which is the move from occupation to annexation, where you feel that the old excuses, quote unquote, the old talking points cannot work, where you're talking about a different Israeli government, so to speak, which is way more difficult to defend its policy in that sense. You turn to the so-called nuclear option to try to silence and protect yourself in the public discussion. And that is a completely unacceptable and disturbing thing.
How would things change if Donald J. Trump becomes president again?
I don't want to think about that. This is going to be...
Well, come on. I'm afraid you have to think about that.
Yeah, you're forcing me into the worst nightmares.
Yeah.
It will be 10 to 100 times worse than what we have now.
Why?
If not to full annexation.
Why?
I know that there's this school of thought that, Trump is unpredictable, just like Trump, you know, he's not against abortion. But he would never appoint a judge that is pro-choice because there are issues that are religious for the party. Israel-Palestine is also an issue that is religious to the party. So his unpredictability will only go even way worse for us than what we...
I see.
You know, we have 4 years under Trump. We saw it, yeah? He basically took a plan of apartheid and called it peace. That's the peace for prosperity, yeah? The Trump plan, so-called. And in a very perfectionist way, by the way, of maximizing geography to Israel while excluding maximum Palestinian demography from rights. Yeah, very, very. It was a brilliant plan in my eyes, and you know, if we had the time, would go deep into that. It was brilliant. Yeah. I also think that if he takes power, he will have his own judicial overhaul, like Netanyahu has in Israel, right? He will focus on gutting American democracy and American institutions because they stole the elections from him, right? They took him on a political trial, et cetera, right? And then we know who are the guys who are going to deal with our file. It's the Kushners and the Friedmans, yeah? And we know where they stand, right? And don't forget Miriam Edelson, the big donor, one of his biggest donors, right?
Yes.
They wanted to move of the embassy last time. Who knows what they want this time? Is it full annexation? Is it annexation only of the of Area C? So yeah, I really don't see how Trump can be a positive force for our life in Israel-Palestine, and obviously also in other things around the world, American democracy, EU, liberalism versus illiberalism, Russia, Ukraine, just name it.
Okay. There was more than one who asked the question, do you have any intention to go to politics in Israel? Why not?
First of all, because I think I'm going to be very bad at this.
Really?
Yeah.
But you're able to argue like a politician. Aren't you?
But
yes.
but thank you. But I don't think so. I think there's way better. I know many people will be way better than I am on this. Yeah, but yeah.
Do you feel more powerful in the situation you are in right now than you would be as a politician? Is it that?
I don't think I would be a good politician, so I don't think so it's not really a question. But I would have been very happy to have political parties, politicians who stand for what I stand in power, and in a place where we can actually implement some of these ideas that we have.
Okay. There was a question. Could you explain the Dahya doctrine?
Dahya.
Dahya. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So that relates to Gaza in Lebanon.
Yeah.
So Dahya is the southern part in Beirut, a Shiite area in Beirut. It's a doctrine that was developed vis-a-vis Lebanon and then kind of like adopted to Gaza, so to speak. The idea is this. Israel is not anymore in the old school conventional wars, where it's very clear who wins, who loses. You eliminated the enemy, you took over the territory, you won, you didn't, yeah? We are in what would be called the asymmetrical war.
Right.
Where conflict is doomed to resume. So the strategic goal has shifted from eliminating the enemy to take over the territory to buying more time between rounds of conflict. So how do you do this? How you do that? And that's where the doctrine, the thinking kicks in. The problem is the rules of the game, meaning international law, the idea of proportionality. Why? Because think of it, Hezbollah fires a rocket. Proportionate response, we bomb a building, an empty building. What do they care? They fire a rocket again another week. And the next week and the next week. And that's not a way you can run a modern economy. That's not how we can run our society. This is unacceptable. So what's the answer? A deliberate, disproportionate response.
Yeah.
You pick my nose. I run over you with a tank. And in that case, you will think a million times before you pick a fight with me. In other words, what the Dachya doctrine argues, establishing deterrence via deliberate, disproportionate destruction of civilian property and infrastructure.
Do you this strategy empower in the kind of response we see as the Israeli response to Gaza, to Hamas?
So, as I said, around Operation Cast Sled 2008-9, that idea from South Lebanon was brought into the way we fight in Gaza. And since then, this is part of what guides the way we fight in Gaza.
Okay. Sorry.
But again, don't forget, if international law, if the pillars of IHL, some of the main pillars are the principle of distinction between legitimate military targets and civilian, and proportionality. What the Dachya argues, deliberate, disproportionate destruction of civilian infrastructure and property.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. We by
so disproportionate and on civilian infrastructure. So
is it that what we see?
I'm saying it's a violation. It's a double violation. Of the principle of proportionality and of the principle of distinction.
Yes. Would you say this is the today reality in Gaza?
This is definitely the reality in the wars before this war. Is this influencing the war now? Yes. But now they're talking about eliminating Hamas. So it might be even more Dachya than Dachya, so to speak. Okay. So I don't know if this is, but up to now, definitely yes.
In a way, that's a follow-up question. Is there a right of armed resistance for the Palestinians versus Israel?
Look, under international law, nation, people under occupation have a right to resist. But again, it's only against military targets, not against civilians, right? When I was a soldier in the West Bank, I remember myself standing, thinking to myself, if a Palestinian comes and attacks me, they have a right to do that. I'm a soldier. I'm a legitimate target as a soldier.
But only as a soldier, they would not have the right to attack civilians.
Exactly. It's, that's very clear.
Coming back to the green line you mentioned, there was a question who said you oppose annexion of land under the conditions of the green line would be kosher. So why wouldn't the dividing plan of the United Nations of 1947, 1948, why wouldn't that be kosher?
If I understood right, the question was, why are we talking about the pre-67 lines and not on the partition plan lines?
Yeah.
Because that's Security Council resolutions. I'm not, don't come to me. It is actually a very interesting question, which I'm not sure I know the answer to, which is, how did we move from the partition to the 67 borders? Yeah?
There was a war.
To the pre-67 borders. Yeah. No, but if I look at Security Council resolutions, it's very clear. It's based on the 67 borders, and that's why I say it.
Okay.
It's international law, and that's what we follow.
Okay, I understand. You claim, that's about the last question, that comes from me. Put myself on the list.
Exactly.
You claim to be a Zionist, right?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between your definition or your understanding of Zionism towards the vision of Netanyahu, Smotrich, and other right-wing Zionists? What's the difference if you use the same expression? Oops.
You know, in my perspective, the bottom line is that I believe Jews have a right to collective rights within the land of Israel. And that's, for me, the essence of Zionism.
Due to history.
Yeah, this is the fundamentals of Zionism in my eyes. I think what Smotrich, what Ben Gvir, what they want is Jewish supremacy, which is very different. Yeah. I believe that the state of Israel needs to be a full democracy with equal rights to everyone, should not be an occupying power, should not rule over another people, should not grab land of other people, should have as its neighbor the state of Palestine, etc., etc. All these things, these guys are against.
And can you imagine that this vision of a, let's call it, lawful and peaceful Zionist perspective would be accepted by Palestinians?
Look, the PLO has recognized Israel. Israel has never recognized Palestine. That's a fact. The entire Arab League has the Saudi initiative, right? Complete integration into the region if we do two states. I haven't heard any surfing prime minister from 2002 in Israel saying a word. The Organization of Islamic Countries, apart from Iran, accepted it. Yeah? This is the dream that we had of stop being a foreign organ in the region and being accepted. And all what we have to do is end occupation. Two states.
Yehuda, thank you.
But we didn't do it.
Thanks for your time, your answers. Thanks for your work. Danke für eure Fragen, eure Unterstützung. Wer im vergangenen Monat dabei war, seht ihr jetzt im Abspann. Ihr wisst, ohne eure Unterstützung gäbe es dieses Format gar nicht. Danke dafür. Wir sehen uns hoffentlich bald wieder. Bis dahin, tschüss.
Thank you.